I know that our family is better off for having taken those chances and tried those new things, even when they were risky.
That's Aaron Amin, a new dad of 3 and an investor who bought 8 rental properties in 7 years. But just before his real estate journey began, when he was working in a high-stress career in the music industry, things got worse.
I thought I was doing the right stuff, but I was drinking too much, and I hit a rock bottom point before COVID, and I landed myself in inpatient rehab.
In this episode, you'll hear Aaron's full story, including a big transition from the music industry lifestyle to growing his rental portfolio.
And I had to ask some very tough questions about what I wanted my life to look like. What direction did I want to go?
How Aaron used equity in his primary home to buy 2 new rental properties.
We ended up selling that primary house. We had, I think, about $165,000 gain that we were able to take completely tax-free.
And his struggles while long-distance investing in Iowa.
The company we hired went bankrupt within 8 weeks of hiring them. With our very first long-distance rental, we were 2,000 miles away from in the middle of the winter.
And now we're going to dig into all of that and more. All right. So Aaron, I can't wait to dig into your rental property story. I got a lot of questions on that, but I have to start on some personal interest here. I know I've heard your background was with music. You were a drummer in a touring band, and you also organized concerts, like big concerts. And so a couple of random questions. What were some of the biggest concerts you organized? And I'm thinking like, how many people were there? What were some of the names? And this is just like me, music fan, fanboying kind of stuff. So like, I got to hear some of that.
Sure. Yeah. So I used to work for the largest entertainment company in the world. And so they put on shows all the way from 300 capacity clubs all the way up to the stadium shows and festivals. So I've seen, the up and coming bands all the way to the Beyoncés and the Rolling Stones of the world. And I got to participate in literally thousands of shows. So I've seen not only all my favorite artists, but all the major tours. I was right in the middle of it for about 10 years. And, 5 years of that was in Las Vegas. So there were nights when I would see 3 or 4 shows in a single night. That was not uncommon for a while there.
Your own music. So you played drums. Like what, do you have a particular, group that you really like to model that you're like, hey, that would be awesome to be that drummer? Like, we all kind of model people. Who are some of the drummers that you think are just the best?
100%. So I grew up kind of all over the place, but the bulk of the formative years were in Southern California in the early 2000s. So that like Red Hot Chili Peppers, nice. Incubus, that alt rock kind of beachy vibe really resonated with me. So those were the type of bands I listened to. And then I was in a regional touring band based out of Seattle when I lived up there. We did kind of straight ahead, pop, indie rock type stuff.
Love it. I'm gonna be searching some of these old hits from Aaron and after this episode. So that's really cool. And
we'll drop them in the show notes.
All right, exactly. Yes, we might even have some of this in the intro if we can really get this going. And we can get the licensing from your band. But I mean, in all seriousness, like I love music and I'm an outside looking on fan. You kind of lived this life that was, with the Rolling Stones and Beyonce, the big concerts, seems pretty glamorous, pretty amazing. I'm sure there were moments, but I know just from talking to you that as a career, this was sort of also a turning point for you. So could you talk a little bit about that? Just some of the, everybody's got their own career that they're in, and some people feel like they're in a grind. Like, what was that like for you that sort of transitioned you out of that career?
Yeah, absolutely. So as with, many young people, when I was in my early 20s, I had a very, sure vision of my future that I was going to be a drummer in a rock band and I was going to be the one playing the arenas and the stadiums. And I put my heart and soul into becoming the best drummer I possibly could be. I studied that, all through my high school years and early college. And at times I practiced upwards of 7 hours a day. No joke. So I was sitting there just playing the fundamentals, learning different beats and combinations, and very dead set on that vision. And that taught me a lot about discipline, having structure to my days and really committing to a process. Unfortunately, as with many aspiring rock stars, I found that my career took me more on the business side than the performer side. And I was lucky enough that, by playing in all these different venues and playing shows around town, I got to start meeting all these various industry professionals, from the audio engineers to the bookers, all the people kind of at the club level And music scenes are actually much smaller than people realize, even in big cities. There's kind of a few gatekeepers and people that control all the different venues in town. And so I learned a lot about networking. I was always the guy that was willing to show up and do free work and intern at the local clubs. And so just between being a performer and getting out and networking, I found my way into an opportunity to work for that larger company straight out of college. So that started a career. I spent about 10 years in live entertainment, and I worked my way from answering phones at the front desk to booking my own shows. For a while, I booked a 2,000 person club in Las Vegas, and then I also played a support role for all those like arena level, stadium level shows. So I cannot overstate how much I learned during that period of my life and career about hard work and grit, and also how to deal with be resilient in the face of a lot of dynamics that I
egos and
that I did not
personalities
enjoy.
too, right? You got egos and personalities, and people. I think I heard you tell a story where one rapper wanted like some carpet that would feel good on his toes when his shoes are off, and you had to like run all over Las Vegas trying to find some carpet. Like, yeah, that's an interesting job.
I did spend all day driving around looking for a specific type of Berber carpet.
Yeah.
And the punchline of that story is I found it on a Saturday from a carpet warehouse, and I brought it back, and they didn't end up using it. So that is a pretty good symbolic representation of some of the stuff that we dealt with in the music industry. But basically, I worked in the entertainment industry all the way up until March 14th, 2020, which I think most people remember that crazy week in March when stuff started shutting down for COVID. And essentially my whole livelihood and the industry I was working in evaporated overnight. I remember very vividly, we had, I was in Las Vegas, so we had several shows per day in Las Vegas, usually only Monday, Tuesday, and maybe Thursday was off. But we had to cancel hundreds of shows in pretty much, a few hour span. Mm. And with that, there went my job as well. So I had this kind of fork in the road where I had to choose if I wanted to stay in the entertainment industry or if I wanted to, pursue something else. And unemployment in Las Vegas peaked a little above 25% when the national average was 14%. So I say that just to kind of set the stage for where my head was at during that pivotal time. And that ties into some of the rental story. The last thing I'll say about that career path, right, is that it was truly 70, 80 hours a week. I worked normal Monday through Friday office hours, and I went to shows 3 or 4 nights a week. If I didn't have a show that I was representing, I would go to our competitors' shows, and with that came the lifestyle, the accompanying lifestyle. So I lived pretty hard and fast for a while. I thought I was doing the right stuff, but I was drinking too much, eating out all the time, and that really started adding up, even in my 20s. And I hit a rock bottom point before COVID. It was in 2019, and I landed myself in inpatient rehab, and I had to ask some very tough questions about what I wanted my life to look like, not only from my health standpoint, but just what direction did I want to go. And so I think from there, coming out of that, I'm grateful to say I have about 5.5 years of sobriety now, and that really stuck with me. But coming out of that, I channeled a lot of that misdirected energy that I had towards finding a new passion, which quickly became real estate investing. So I think it was no coincidence that within 6 months of coming out of rehab, we owned 3 rental properties. And so that journey started quickly and escalated quickly. Wow. So I'll pause there.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, first of all. And I think so many people will resonate with that, the true story behind kind of what the pivot points were for you. And I know just from us talking personally too, the personal relationship you have with somebody else to get into real estate investing is always really important. Like for those of us who have significant others, like it's a team game. And so can you talk a little bit about that conversation? You're out of rehab, you're figuring out where to redirect your energy, and your now wife, you'll have a conversation, I think, about, some of the things you could pivot into, including real estate investing, and also like your wedding. Like, how's this wedding going to fit into all this? I think I'd love to hear more about that part of the story.
Yeah. So, very, we were very lucky that we started our journey in Vegas when we did. So we moved there in 2015. We bought a primary home in 2017. It was a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in, centrally located near downtown. And our mortgage, principal, interest, tax, and insurance was $948 a month.
There we go.
So even though we didn't make a ton of money, entertainment industry is notoriously overworked and underpaid. My wife worked in nonprofit that was affiliated with the same company, but we weren't pulling in a huge, dual income situation, but it was very comfortable and we were able to save. But as I mentioned before, the amount of effort and energy that I was putting into my job, I did not feel reciprocal value coming out. I didn't have any stock in the company, no stock options. And there weren't these bonus plans to where the shows that I was booking that were making all this money, I didn't see any of that upside, right? And so it became very unclear to me how to build a enduring future for us financially. We knew we wanted to have kids at some point. We did get married before the rehab stint, but we decided to get married in our backyard because we couldn't quite see how, based on our trajectory at that time, how we were going to make good financial progress and plan towards having a family. So yeah, that decision, we got married in our backyard of our primary house. Our wedding cost $225, $150 for the court filing fee, $75 for the minister. You can call up a minister in Vegas and they'll be over in about 2 hours. You can walk down the street and get your marriage license printed out same day. They got a nice little industry there, but that decision alone allowed us to take the money that we would have spent on a wedding and turn it into our first rental house. So yeah, there were a lot of decisions, that we made in that time based on kind of how things were unfolding, and getting into rental properties specifically was a real turning point for us. And I think once I had freed up that energy coming out of the rehab stint, I had just a clear head. And honestly, like anyone who's struggled with any type of addiction issue knows that you do lose a lot of energy to those vices. And once you can recapture it and redirect it, I know a lot of people that have come out very, very strong. And if you can latch it onto the right type of pursuit, you can get a pretty tremendous amount of stuff done if you apply yourself.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me. I mean, human psychology is fascinating, and just looking at ourselves. And two things about your story that really stood out to me, among others, is one, channeling of the energy, figuring out, all right, I'm going to rechannel it into something else, like real estate investing. The other is I'm always curious what people's motivations are, Aaron. Like, all right, for me to do this real estate, you're a very motivated real estate investor. You've been doing this for 7 years now. It made a lot of progress. So part of that, like, it shows me, all right, that energy you had refocused, but it's also that your description of the job and how, like, you're working for somebody else, you're getting underpaid for the value you're contributing, you don't have any upside. Like, I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like, that's, we trade hours for dollars all the time. But one of the really appealing things to me about real estate investing is I found a lot of rental investors are kind of a little bit of a control freak, to say it in a nice way. Like, we like to have some control over our own destiny. And so maybe that's a nice segue into that first rental property, because I could sense that, no control in the job, underpaid, versus my own business buying rental properties and total upside. Like, this is 100% up equity for me and my wife. And so I want to pause there, though, before we get into the first rental, because you had kind of a unique situation, which I share, that your parents had rental properties. And so I think even for people who are listening to this whose parents didn't have rental properties, because most people didn't, I think it's interesting because a lot of people have kids who they're wondering, like, I wonder if they're watching what I'm doing with these rentals, and I wonder if they'll ever want to do it too. So I'm curious for you about that relationship between, you didn't do anything with rentals for a long time. All of a sudden, oh yeah, my parents have it. That's a good idea. Like, what was the conversation there? What was the dialogue with your parents on that?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So, I mean, I grew up with my mom and my stepdad both worked at Microsoft in the 90s, which anyone who was there at that time, there was a lot of prosperity. And so they were very, lucky to be able to start investing, when they were still pretty young. And so they started investing when I was about 10 years old. And I'll be very honest, I did not pay much attention to it as it was happening in real time. I was aware of it. I would see them sometimes take calls, and they actually always self-managed their properties. They had never really worked with another property manager. They had a few different chapters of their investing journey. They started in San Diego. They traded 4 houses in San Diego for 13 houses in Knoxville, Tennessee, in 2007, which meant that they got caught holding the bag on those during the recession in 2008. And so I remember a sentiment or an overall feeling, but I was at college during that time. When I was in San Diego, I was listening to Incubus and playing drums. I would be lying if I said I was taking it all in real time. But as you mentioned, once the interest kind of awoke inside of me, of course, the first people I reached out to was them, because that idea, they had mentioned to me that, hey, at some point in life, like, this is a great supplemental thing you can add that can grow over a long period of time and can really change the trajectory of your financial future. So that idea was seeded in my mind. But I think it's one of those realizations you have to come to on your own.
Yeah.
If you like force somebody or try and, push them in that direction, well, a lot of people focus on the downsides of rental property investing and not the upside. But I think the upside is what really sparked the interest in me. And so that first property, I didn't read any Bigger Pockets books. I didn't know what Bigger Pockets was. I didn't have any other investor friends. Frankly, we entered rather blindly into our first property, and my parents were the only real advisors that we worked with on that. And they have a lot of great knowledge as well. But yeah, this whole world that I'm in now, with people such as yourself and all these different communities of investors, I didn't have any of that. And I share that because I think some people feel that it's a prerequisite to buying your first property is to consume 1,000 hours of podcasts and read 20 books. But I guess myself as an example, you don't have to. Mm-hmm. It's advised to get some baseline knowledge, but you certainly don't have to. And I did some writing recently on, the lessons I learned from this first property. The fundamentals we use to buy it are, if you plug them into a spreadsheet and use the methodology that I use today, we wouldn't have bought it, right? This would have been something we passed over. But we played it as safe as we possibly could. It was newly constructed from the ground up. We put 30% down, to really buy into some nice cash flow. We self-managed it. It was about a mile down the street from our primary house. So I'm a long distance investor now, but it definitely did not start that way. So I'll pause there.
Yeah. So your plan was, I have some people I know who are good advisors. I can get some basics from them. And then you bought a property in a neighborhood where you were, which is often the safest way to do it, right? Because you can go look at the house. You can sort of, what I love about real estate, I know you know this too, is like the qualities or the fundamentals of real estate are really intuitive. It's just like, is that a good place to live? Yeah, that's a good place to live. Does that house look like something that everybody would want to live in? Yeah. And then you ran the basic numbers of saying, all right, we're going to buy this and put 30% down. What's the mortgage payment? What's that look like? What's the rent? What's the expenses? I am curious what was the price you paid for that one and what year was that? Because we're going to fast forward to all of your properties and kind of look at that in the big picture. But let's start with this first one.
Sure. Yeah. So it was just under $250,000 in 2019. Mm-hmm. And we put 30% down on that. That was our wedding reallocation, plus a bunch of savings.
It's about 75 grand plus was about where you were in terms of down payment. Mm-hmm. Got it. And do you remember what the rent was day one when you first started?
$1,400.
Got it. All right. So this is no 1% rule property, right? That's what I wanted to emphasize to people. This is and what the kind of neighborhood you were living in. I mean, these 1,500 to 2,000 square foot houses. Like just to paint a picture for people what this looks like.
So this neighborhood where we lived and where this house was located, downtown Las Vegas is notorious. About in 2010, people would avoid this neighborhood like the plague. Nobody wanted to walk there. It was dangerous and, all sorts of seediness about it. By the time we moved there in 2015, there was dumpsters outside of every other house. People were flipping them left and right and really trying to turn the neighborhood around. And so we bought into that idea that, hey, there's a lot of progress. This is centrally located. There was the owner of Zappos who unfortunately passed away. He had made some $100+ million investment in revitalizing this area. So there were a few things that we were just aware of where we believed in the area. We did not by any means research it the way that we would now. But yeah, we did what you said. We said, hey, here's the rent that we can get. Here's what the principal, interest, tax, and insurance will be. And as long as that number is positive enough to cover potential expenses, which we had no idea, like we didn't use percentages or anything, then that was good enough for us.
Yeah.
But I didn't even know about depreciation. I didn't really understand how to conceptualize the big picture and all these different benefits.
Yeah.
So we just went in for like a stable asset. That was the goal, and we accomplished that singular goal.
In many ways, we're going to talk about some different types of rental properties you bought in different markets, but I love the intuitiveness of that. Again, like going back to real estate, it's just those things are really important. Like the fact that you're in a neighborhood that's got some momentum, it's up and coming, you live there, so you sort of know where the centers of things are. So I'm just relaying that to everybody else. Like I think those talents you use to find a place to rent or to buy yourself, you can use that to find a neighborhood. And in this case, you bought a property that was I call these like the pretty path and the path of progress. Like, all right, this is not like a major fixer upper house. It already was remodeled. This wasn't like the home run numbers in terms of rent to price ratio. But if you have enough capital and you're able to buy in a quality location, then I mean, let's actually fast forward on this one property. Like here we are, that was 2019, 2024 now. Like what does this property look like today in terms of value and rent, just to give people a kind of indication?
Yeah, so Vegas, in true Vegas fashion, it was kind of a roller coaster since 2019. It appreciated dramatically, both rents and the property value in 2020 and 2021. And then it had a bit of a pullback, especially this particular neighborhood. So the house right now is worth probably right around 400, maybe a little bit higher, which kind of astounds me, to be honest, just how quickly that happened. And the rent growth, the market rent is probably around 2,200 now, based on the comps we pulled just the other day. And we've had the same tenant. We've been very lucky. We've had the same tenant in there since we bought the property. But we did not raise the rent from 1,400 to 2,200 over the last 5 years. When we were novice operators, we actually held the rent flat for 3 years because everything was going fine.
Yeah.
And then what happened is the rent, went up almost 80% in certain parts of Vegas. And at that point, we couldn't even catch up to those rent increases. So even today, we're at about 1,800 rent. So we have a nice cash flow, but one of the exercises I've done and with you, Chad, is run the return on equity calculation. And even though we have a nice cash flowing asset that's in good shape with stable tenants in an area that we believe in long term, the return on that equity that's trapped in there is below 1%. And life is not lived in a spreadsheet. There's something to be said for the quality of the asset. But now, and knowing what I know now versus what we knew when we bought this property, I think about things a bit differently. And so we're even at a point in our investing journey where we think of, is that the right use of all that equity and that money?
Especially when you're in the builder phase. I always talk on the podcast about you got to get in the game as a starter, just get a deal or two under your belt. You move into the builder phase where you're focusing on return on investment and getting a good return on your equity as a builder is critical, because that's how because ultimately the end of the game is trying to get your wealth up to a certain point where you can harvest equity and live off of it. And so, yeah, you're purely, actually, I want to talk about where you think you are in the stages, but definitely during this phase where you've had the last 5 years, you've been in the builder phase. And so, yeah, having some equity trapped can be suboptimal. Nonetheless, you bought that rental property, your knowledge compound. Let's kind of start connecting the dots on the other 8 properties or the other 7 properties that you have. And I want to focus on your residence, actually. And for some people, this is going to seem like maybe your residence is kind of a boring thing. It's just a place you live. I've always loved using our residence as a chess piece, something that helped you grow well. So we're going to stay in Vegas. Then we're going to go to another town where you live. But let's talk about that first residence you bought with your wife. And you've had this like kind of a different eras of that property. Like you start off as your residence, then you used it to cash out refi. So let's talk about how you leverage the equity in that residence to actually buy your next rental properties.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got 4 uses out of a single property, none of which were intentional or thought out ahead of time. Kind of just figured it out as we went. So when we first bought that property in 2017, we bought it because we were a young couple that wanted to, take what felt like the next logical progression in our lives. We weren't married at that time. We got married about a year later, and we were going through all that other stuff I described earlier. And then the idea of rental properties really came about, shortly after the whole rehab chapter. But as a result of buying that first rental, even as conservatively as we did it, and with as little information as we about what it means to be a real estate investor, about 4 months later, the agent that sold us that house called and he said, "Hey, I know you guys are young and trying to build a foundation. I could see your eyes light up when you were learning all this stuff about real estate. I have this very unique opportunity for 2 houses. They're currently leased to a company that offers supported living, so assisted living. They're on 5-year leases that are locked in about 30% above the market rent, and they have built-in rent increases every year, and they automatically renew at the end of 5 years unless you terminate. And these companies have no intention of terminating. They've been in business for 50 years. My jaw was dropping as he told me this, because I said, that sounds like a commercial type deal, not something that you would encounter with a single family house. So anyway, we said, well, we just basically dumped our piggy bank out between these 2 houses. Like there's very few stones left to overturn to try and get those. So we were able to find a lender who would let us put 15% down, and we did a cash out refi on our primary house, because basically, in my mind, there was no option other than to buy these 2 houses, because I saw how powerful they could be for our real estate foundation. So we did a cash out refi. Oddly enough, I think maybe the stars aligned in our favor. We closed on that cash out refi the Friday before my furlough went into effect on my concerts position. So we were, only a few days away from that not going through and all these deals potentially falling through. But we were able to get that in time and then buy the other 2 properties. And then even further with that primary house, we went on to, when we moved away from Vegas back to Washington State, we had to decide, should we sell that or should we keep it as a rental? And basically, the math worked out. We were moving back to Seattle area. If we wanted to buy a house in Seattle as a primary, we would have probably had to sell all 4 of those houses to find something, even remotely compatible with our long-term goal. We knew we wanted to have kids, and that just didn't sit right with us. So we actually rented when we went to Seattle, and we kept our 4 rental properties in Vegas. That's when we really became these long-distance investors and learned how to even self-manage from afar. But then fast forward one little more click, and we ended up selling that primary house and using what's known as the capital gains exclusion. So because we had lived in there for 2 out of the previous 5 years, we were able to sell the house. We had, I think, about $165,000 gain that we were able to take completely tax-free. So we lived in it. We got married in the backyard. We did a cash out refi, used it to buy 2 more rentals. We turned it into a rental itself that had pretty significant cash flow. And then we sold it at a pretty significant gain. So it has played an incredible amount of utility in our personal lives and our investing journeys. And frankly, a lot of that, unintentional. We were just kind of following the signals and adding tools to our kit as we went.
It's incredible, right? And so your boring little residence, right? The thing that, I think it was Kiyosaki or somebody said that your residence is not an asset. And I hear a story like that. I'm like, yeah, it is. It is an asset because you can leverage it. You can rent it. You can move out. You can move in. You can sell it. And I think that's one of my favorite things about small and mighty investing is that it's like a game you're playing with fewer pieces, but you can be super intentional about the pieces you do have. And so your primary residence, really big piece. All 4 of those things were really incredible. You eventually sold it, used the money to kind of go to your next phase of your life. But by the time you wrap up the Vegas album, the Vegas era of your life, you've got 3 rental properties. The 2 the two that you bought that were kind of long-term leases to assisted living, I'm assuming those are cash flowing pretty well at this point. I mean, I'm curious, number one, like how much cash did you pull out of the house, your residence, to buy those? And then roughly how much cash flow did those produce at that point?
Yeah, so we pulled about 60,000 out, and then we were able to buy in. We sold, basically more like a pretty risky move. We pretty much emptied our savings to get up to the 15% on each of the houses, and they were paying probably about 2,200 each in rent, and the mortgage PITI was around 1,200 or so, and that hasn't gone up. The tax and insurance in Vegas is pretty reasonable. It's not like in Houston where I live now, which is the tax and insurance where I live now is higher than the PITI on our primary house in Vegas 5 years ago. So those have been our two best performing properties. So that all these kind of risky maneuvers and that frantic trying to find a way to buy them has played out very well in our favor. Yeah. And we even refinanced those and got rid of the PMI and got them above the 20%. So nice. Those have just become more and more of a bedrock of our portfolio, and we plan to hold them forever.
I like it. Yeah. So let's wrap up that first phase of your life. I mean, you're in Vegas, you take a chance, you kind of pivot your career, you do what you got to do. I mean, that's so common. Every story is a little bit different, but it's so common that you have to go all in. Like you got to take a risk. Like when you're in that starter phase of your career, you have to take a risk. I mean, because otherwise you're not going to get up there, and very few people just have a bunch of cash sitting around available. You got to do something a little different, a little creative. And so you did that. You then made a career move because being in the entertainment business isn't an option anymore. You moved back to Washington where your family is. Let's talk about the Washington album, the Washington era here. So you still keep the Vegas properties. Now you go to Washington. How did you expand your real estate business there? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I want to say one thing first, right? And that's that, we quickly came to embrace being a real estate investor as part of our identity, not some afterthought or side project, but really a true integral part of our identity. And so every which way we looked and turned, we were trying to think, how can we continue to expand in a smart and strategic way and add to this? And I would be lying if I said that we weren't thinking that adding more properties was going to be the way to get there. Whereas my mindset's changed a little bit on that now. But when we moved, we did that calculation that, hey, if we're going to live in Seattle, we are going to end up paying way more than we're comfortable with for a house. And the only way to do that would be to divest from these rentals. So we said, we're going to hold on to these rentals. We moved to Seattle, which is where my employer is based. And turns out, during COVID in Washington, nobody was going to the office anyway. So I was able to continue to keep working remotely, which I still have to this very day. And we spent about a year in the Seattle area renting. And we actually decided to move to Central Washington, which is about 2 hours away. I only needed to go into the office once every few months. And so we said, why live in this expensive city, which I had spent plenty of my life in already. We were ready for something different. My parents lived in Central Washington. And we also knew that we wanted to have a kid soon. And we even got pregnant during that time. So it's hard to tell this story without, highlighting all the personal change that was going on, because that was a huge influence in all this. When I started, I was in my mid-20s, running and gunning, going to concerts 4 nights a week. And now I have 3 children under the age of 3, and we moved across the country multiple times, right? So I want to share, like the buying properties sequentially is only part of the story. There's so many other factors that played in.
Your identity is a big one too. Like, I'm glad you brought that up, because the identity as a rock star, I heard you in the passion in your voice. Like, I am a rock star. Like I'm practicing 7 hours a day, to that transition to I am a real estate investor. I mean, but both have their different paths. Right. And so I find that I haven't thought about it that way before, but the identity as an entrepreneur, as an investor is a big leap for a lot of people, because you're in this career doing something else. and to see yourself as the kind of person who owns rentals, who deals with those problems and deals with all the pluses and the minuses. If you don't see yourself as that, you're not going to do the learning you need. You're not going to buy in. You're not going to be all in. It's just going to be this little thing you dabble in, this little hobby. And I found that people who just dabble in stuff are not really going to get it. Like your identity's got to be in this thing. So that's such a cool point to bring up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. But basically, I think there's a lot of people out there that own one rental, maybe two, and it's just kind of this ancillary component of their life. Whether they operate it well or not, they don't think of themselves as investors, and they maybe don't talk about it or share openly. And obviously communities like yours and others that I'm a part of now, when you surround yourself with people that are doing the thing, you're much more likely to do it well and also feel like you're not the crazy person in the room.
Yeah.
But I digress. So the Washington chapter, we moved to Central Washington where homes were more affordable, but still very expensive. And we ended up doing two owner-occupied homes where we actually partnered with my parents. They helped seed the down payment, and our plan all along was to live in them and then use them as rental properties. And so we would split the cash flow. So we did that. We bought two pretty nice houses. We bought them at good values and got great interest rates on them. One of them was a duplex that was actually, oddly enough, we found it off market through a realtor, and it was being valued as if it was a single family. We bought it for about $500,000, and almost instantly, when the appraisal came back, it was around $575 because the owner had built a separate standing 3-bed, 2-bath, pretty much house on the lot, and so that is our highest cash flow property to date. We right out of the gate were able to rent it for about $4,200, and our PITI was a little over $2,000. So that's been another amazing property for us. And then we had a primary that we lived in for about a year and a half up until when we moved to Houston. I will say that second primary that we bought, our intention was to live there for a long time. But when we found out we were having twins, our whole personal household calculation changed. And again, that's another example of, life not playing out sequentially on a spreadsheet. We had to, refactor not only our financial lives, but make it a very tough, big decision about where we wanted to spend the next chapter of our life with our children. So we ended up relocating to Texas, but instead of selling this house, a nice, valuable house with a cheap debt on it in an appreciating area, we said, let's keep it and rent it. And so that's where the Washington chapter ends.
Yeah. So long-term strategy wise, you're playing the buy and hold game. Maybe if I had to kind of try to analyze, be a color commentator and analyze your moves so far, that you've really heavily utilized your residence in turning your residence into a rental property. So you had the Vegas one that you rented out and then sold. You had the pure rental property that you bought in Vegas. And then you had the Washington house that you have lived in and then kept it as a rental. So you've taken advantage of the fact that owner-occupant financing is better, that you get to live in the house, you get to know it, and then you move out. But instead, what most people do is they sell it, you just keep it. And that's a big deal. The other thing you've done is you've kind of mixed in some cash flow properties with that. And so your two long-term leases on the assisted living kind of fit it more in that category, that they're more cash flow rentals. So you got a nice mix, but you're in two markets. Both of them are sort of opportunistic. Now you've moved to Houston, and was this a career move as well, or is this being near family, or how did that kind of precipitate at that point?
I've worked for the same employer since I left the entertainment industry, and I'm very lucky too that I've been able to make almost more than double what I was making in the entertainment industry. So I was able to grow my career, not from a skill perspective and financially, and shift to remote work, which as I became a father became increasingly important to me to be able to, get rid of the commutes and be home with my family. Huge priority for me, and enormous contrast to the 4 or 5 nights a week I used to go out. That was clearly not meant to be part of my life permanently. But anyway, we moved down because, when we were having twins, my dad and his side of the family lives in Houston. And we just started modeling everything out. Like daycare in Washington was going to be almost $5,000 a month just for 3 kids. Here it was under 3. You could get a house that's almost twice the size for a fraction of the price. You just started adding all these components together of what do we want our life to look like for the next
Yeah.
decade, and that's where the chips fell. But we held on to the Washington properties. While we were in Washington, we actually bought 3 rentals in Iowa. That was the first market that we did, purely long distance. We had no previous tie there. We never lived there. We just wanted to add another skill to our tool belt and learn long distance investing. But we went from dual income, no kids, to one income, one kid, to one and a part time income, 3 kids, all over the course of about 2.25 years. And so it's just hard to overstate the
you
amount
got to
of change.
hold on to the roller coaster, right? Yeah, that's some interesting changes.
Exactly.
Love it. Well, so I can't help thinking about these as albums, and maybe it's because my younger daughter has like all these Taylor Swift albums all over the wall upstairs that I'm always looking at. But you like the new era for Aaron and his wife move into the Iowa era here, where you bought more properties. So that was sort of, you said that really fast, but like I think people might be thinking, okay, like wow, you bought the Vegas properties, you went all in on those, used all your savings, you bought the Washington properties, partnered with somebody else who had some capital that was helpful. So let's just talk about strategy with Iowa. Like why did you, I want to look at it from a couple different angles. Number one, why Iowa and how did you choose the market? I think that'll be helpful for people. And then we'll get into some of the money and the details as well, because I think that'll be another aspect people want to know about.
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, when we bought our first rental, I had never heard of Bigger Pockets. I wasn't part of any communities. The only investors I spoke to were my parents. And I had seen kind of the way they moved. They shifted markets. They did some stuff long distance. They did some stuff in market. So I kind of was operating off of one playbook. But as time went on and as I embraced this identity, I started to expose myself to other investors and learn more than one way of doing things, right? So the idea of long distance investing came up somewhat out of necessity because Vegas appreciated like crazy. There was no way we were going to be able to come up with another $70,000 down payment based on our incomes. And yeah, we had the equity that we had in those houses. But there's only so many times you can, recycle that same money just to buy another single family. Same thing in Washington. We had to partner in order to be able to afford those in the first place. We were very aggressively saving in the time leading up to having our kids. And I had, when I left my previous employer, I had a big 401k. There were a few kind of rocks that we were able to turn over and borrow from. And we sold my wife's car. We are not, financial independence, retire early, frugal type people. Frugality is not something I'm known for, but there are a few things that we've done that allowed us to buy more rentals, like skipping our wedding and selling a car that I would like to think maybe fit in that playbook. But we got really scrappy and we tried to figure out where can we actually afford to invest and continue to grow, that we can still find cash flow. And I loved the idea of kind of taking all this operational knowledge from self-managing, learning how to buy and sell, and just trying to build something new. I love the idea of building businesses. So how do we build something new in a different market? We researched a bunch of markets in the Midwest and the South, and ultimately we landed on this area called the Quad Cities, because you could buy a house for somewhere in the $100,000 to $130,000 range, and it would rent for $1,400 to $1,600. So even in 2021 and 2022, when prices had run up like crazy, breaking any type of records all across the country, you had this really stable, not volatile at all market in the Midwest, and that's what we wanted, because our Vegas and our Washington properties felt like a roller coaster. They went up, they went down. It was mostly up, which is a good thing, but it felt like we were never going to be able to continue to grow unless we found a new market. So we did some research and we landed on that Quad Cities area, and we found an agent, and we kind of followed a sequential playbook of how we would build our team. There's plenty of mistakes built in there that I can get into, but I'll pause there for a second.
Okay, yeah, I do want to go into some of the operational stuff, but it sounds like kind of the core piece of it is we can afford a certain amount. Like we've got a savings, we got an amount of cash we can save. We know we need to make a down payment on these rental properties. So $130,000 house, $100,000 house. If I have to make a 20% down payment, that's 20 to 30,000 bucks, as opposed to buying a $600,000 house in another part of the country, or $800,000 property, which would be a what is that, 120,000 to $860,000 down payment. So it really does come down to, can I get into this or can I not? And then you also looked at the market itself. This was a more stable market to kind of balance out your up and down market, which over time, the Vegas and Washington markets are probably going to build, I would guess, even more wealth, like because of the leverage you have, because of the growth. But this is a way to stay in the game. Otherwise, you would have had to be sitting on the sidelines. Is that accurate? Is that kind of a good summary?
100% accurate.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about the operations and also some of the lessons, because managing remotely when you used to live there is a little bit different than having to plop yourself down in a new market and nobody. So like, how did you build the team, and maybe what are some stories there that might be lessons for people?
I would not recommend building the team the way we built the team at the beginning, and I'll tell you why. One of the lessons that we've learned very much the hard way is you want to meet other investors that are already operating in a market that you're thinking about going into before you start putting in offers and entering a market. At least that's my opinion now from where we sit. We did a lot of online research. We were part of a community that specifically focused on long distance investing. They had a small, list of potential referral partners, but in bright, bold letters, it said none of these constitute an endorsement, of this performance, right? So you were left to kind of do your own due diligence, and we followed a pretty, detailed list of questions, to ask to understand our agent, what's their background, our property manager, what's their background. And frankly, we didn't do enough due diligence. The first agent we spoke to, had satisfactory answers to our questions. And instead of calling 2 or 3 other agents, we kind of just rolled with them. Same with the property manager. We had someone who gave us great answers. We had never worked with a property manager before. So he gave us answers that sounded like they were reasonable to us. And we kind of just accepted it at face value. We didn't check with other investors. We didn't ask for investor testimonials. And it's embarrassing even kind of explaining how little we did to verify a lot of the information we were consuming. But we basically built a team based on the people that popped up in front of us. And we paid the price for that. We have a good relationship with that agent still. And we actually did more transactions with them. But, now I think of it differently. I want someone who really has an investor-friendly focus. They understand rentals, they own rentals, and they have a relationship with other people that are investors or support investors. Same with property management. I have a whole list of things that I would do to verify that they're doing what they say. Long story short, the company we hired went bankrupt and went out of business within 8 weeks of hiring them, with our very first long distance rental we were 2,000 miles away from in the middle of the winter. So we had every reason to believe that we had failed at this new experiment of entering a long distance market. And frankly, many, many times we thought about just cutting bait and saying, hey, we're happy with the 5 properties we have. But thankfully, there is a happier end to that story, but I'll pause there just because I felt the need to share some of those mistakes. Hopefully the audience takes something away from that.
I think that's relatable, and it's understandable. Like when you're new to something, you don't even know the questions to ask, or you borrow a list from someone else, but like, which one of those are the most important? How much should I dig into that? So, you're new to anything. So you pick this property manager, you pick this agent, you buy a property. And if I remember right, though, like it's the middle of winter in Quad Cities, which they do have some pretty good winters there. And you're waiting to get a rental news that you're going to have a renter in the house. And 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, nothing from this first property manager until you find out what, like at that point, the house is just sitting vacant.
They overpriced. They said, oh, you can get $1,600 for rent. We had run comps on the tools that we had found out about, and it said you could get around $1,300 But he said, no, 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 we gotta try, like set it high and we'll lower it if we need to. Turns out they weren't even showing the property. They weren't even really actively marketing it. And by far the worst part was that the gas had been turned off and nobody even noticed it. So the house was sitting around 39 degrees in the middle of the Iowa winter. And when we finally found out about that, the guy basically fessed up and said that he was in Idaho visiting his family. He wasn't even there marketing the property. I mean, he had a whole sob story, and it's just like we were devastated because we thought that even the money that we had invested was going to be at risk. Like we weren't even worried about renting it at that point. We were worried about our entire investment going to waste. But the agent that we worked with, she kind of saw this coming from a mile away, and she introduced us to another investor who was also managing properties on the side. Long story short, we ended up hiring her. Within 7 days, she had somebody at 1,300, which was what we thought the market rent would be. She came in. She, quickly dealt with the damage, which thankfully was not as much as we would have thought. And she got the ship righted. And we ended up, sometimes when you bond with people during crisis, there's no way to form a stronger bond than, getting through something tough like that together. And so we actually ended up having her as a manager and buying 2 more houses later in 2022. So it went from, wow, we've made a horrible mistake, we should cut bait and never do long distance investing, to, hey, we found something that works and we would like to find a way to repeat it. I will also say that this whole time we saw our financial lives changing because my wife had stopped working full time at that point. And so there was an end point to when we would be able to continue to self-fund rentals. So I think we felt a little bit of artificial pressure of, hey, let's buy rentals while we still can, knowing that we were going to shift into this family-focused phase shortly after.
Once again, the backdrop of your personal life intermixed with your investing really makes the difference. And so my understanding is that you put, was it 20% down payments on these? Like, did you pay 100,000 or 130,000?
Yeah,
is that about the right
number?
In
those ranges? Yeah.
Okay, so you had like $20,000 to $26,000 investment. So when you're being nervous here that I might lose over $20,000 on a property, like that's real. That's like, yeah, I can feel that as well. But isn't it amazing how I've constantly been amazed that this is a people business. Like the worst part of the business is it can be people. The best part of the business, your hero can be your property manager, it can be another investor, it can be a referral from your agent. I'm just constantly reaffirmed by the good side of the people on your team. And I know you've heard me quote this in Rental Property Mastery a lot, but like John Wooden, one of my heroes, who was a coach for basketball, always said, like, if you want to be the all-star, like he would coach Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton, these all-star basketball players, but he would tell them, he's like, look, if you want to be the all-star, the best player on your all-star team is the rest of your team. Like you're not going to be an all-star unless you have these supporting roles. And that's just the reality of real estate. Like and I don't know a shortcut on figuring some of these things out other than listening to a story like you have, or I've gotten burned as well. You get burned by people, you learn, you hold on for dear life, you right the ship. And here you are though. You have 3 houses in Iowa. You've got 3 properties in Washington, if I'm counting right. Is that right? Or duplex in 1 house, or
yeah.
two in Washington and 3 in Vegas. Is that right? So we have 8 properties total.
Yeah, and we sold that old primary, right? So we at one point had 4 in Vegas, but we've since sold that, so 8 total.
So I want to just like kind of stop at this point. So I love the detail. Thank you for sharing all the numbers and the psychology behind all this. Let's just look back at this, like 5-6 years later. Some people are going to be listening to this, and they're either going to be at the kind of the equivalent of the beginning of your journey. Maybe they're kind of digging their way out of something. Some people are going to be in the middle of their journey. If you reflect back on it, how do you feel about it now? Like, going back to the rock star identity to the real estate investor identity. I'd be curious how you feel about where you are right now, and maybe how you feel about where you want to go from here in this journey.
It's been a really challenging ride, but I wouldn't change a thing. I would definitely advise against some of the mistakes I made, and I'm we'll talk about this, but I'm now passionate about passing that knowledge along, and I've taken a lot of these mistakes and shortcuts that I tried to take. And pieces of knowledge that I went forward without. And I've tried to encapsulate that into some assets that can help other investors avoid those. So I've become very passionate about giving that knowledge forward. But I am very proud of what we've done. It's made an unbelievable impact on our family's future. When we talk about, I used to have a job where I felt like I was pouring everything of my heart into it and I had no upside and it was kind of detracting from my quality of life, to now we have these ultimately 3 separate businesses functioning across 3 states. We feel more in control and have influence over our financial future. Very, very proud of that. And despite the scars and the wounds, I wouldn't change a thing. And I know that our family is better off for having taken those chances and tried those new things, even when they were risky. I'm grateful that it played out the way it did, and even despite some of those obstacles we faced.
I'll just say congratulations, and I'm impressed by the specific results, but also your mindset and what you've built, the way you're building it, and I mean financially, if you just chalk up the scoreboard, I mean you've got a lot of the tailwinds and momentum behind you, because a lot of the hard work is just assembling the portfolio. And then once you assemble the portfolio, it kind of gets a momentum of its own, and you're in the stream. You've got these properties; they're in different markets that are doing well. And I assume, I mean, I don't know your specific numbers, but you've got a few $1,000 a month, maybe in cash flow, something like that, right?
Yeah, we're around 5,000 net, which is pretty extraordinary. Okay. For how for 8 properties, and we have a couple that are better than others, but that makes a very material impact on our lives.
Yeah, so you've got cash flow that you can now reinvest into more stuff or supplement, things in your personal life, and then you've got the wealth, the equity that is growing over time too. You got these debt that's fixed for a long period of time. You got properties that the rent's growing, the wealth's growing. So, really well done. I know you're not finished. You got more work to do, but I want to transition to like what's next for you. Like, do you have more properties you want to buy in your real estate business? Or are you kind of taking a pause? Like, what's the next chapter look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's that cliche saying, what got you here will not get you there. That is very much true for us. We don't have dual income, no kids. We have one and a quarter income and 3 kids. We have, thousands of dollars of daycare costs per month. Our life has changed dramatically since we started assembling this portfolio. So I've invested a lot in education. I've invested a lot in my network. I've invested a lot in being in communities such as yours and other, investors that I look up to. And I believe that the skills and the knowledge that I've gained, I can deploy in different ways. One of which is I do now coach other investors too, that are trying to build, some type of similar portfolio for themselves. Specifically now I focus on long distance because I'm passionate about helping other people avoid some of the mistakes that I made. And I really do think there is a playbook that you can put into place that will work if you work it. So that's one thing I've been focusing on recently. Your books and your community and your philosophy have given me a lot to think about as to what I can do with the existing pieces of my portfolio instead of just focusing on adding. I have a lot of pretty, very solid equity positions, good cash flow. There's a lot I can do with what I already have. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. There's some partnership opportunities I'm exploring. So essentially just going down a couple different routes, trying to see what can come next without putting my family or myself in too risky of a position.
Love it. And I'll just say too, you've been a really important part of our community. So Rental Property Mastery is the community where you do some coaching on your own, but you've also been a coach for us, for some of my members, and to rave reviews and really helping out a lot of people there. And so I want to just say the next phase is exciting. It's going to be interesting. But one of the next things you're doing a lot, which I really like, I follow you on Twitter, I follow your blog, and some of the things you write is you put together something where you had all the details of this portfolio. So everything we talked about today, which I think is really cool. So I want to give you an opportunity to let people know how they can stay in touch with you, how they can follow along with you. And then I'll put all the links to all that in the show notes and the podcast description as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Chad. And I'm grateful for you having me on the show, giving me a chance to tell this story. There were a lot of details in there. It's probably hard to remember just from one listen. So I did write this whole story out, a breakdown of my portfolio, not only, the numbers behind it, but the personal factors that went into the decisions. So I have it all in a sheet you can get for free on my website. It's just aaronamin.com, AARONAMEEN. I've got some freebies there. And if you want to book a call and see if there's any way that would make sense for us to work together, I would love to chat with as many investors as I possibly can, see how I can help.
Yeah, I love it. I read the story. It's really detailed. You're super organized and a good storyteller too. So check it out. Get the free download. And Aaron, thanks for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. And I can't wait to follow along with the next part of your journey.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. In this episode, we talked about the challenges of property management, especially while living long distance. But we actually didn't talk about how to find the best property managers, because if you don't do this, it can cost you thousands of dollars. So in my next video, I talk with investing expert Arion Shihai about the process of finding the best rental property managers, including how to ask them about their market knowledge, how to screen them for the skills and the reliability that you need, and also how to align the incentives of your property manager and you as the property owner. If you're watching on YouTube, you can click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can click in the podcast or the YouTube description below. There'll be a link to the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.